Hey everybody, Trevor here from Triple T Archery, coming to you from the Fine Quality Inn and Suites in Franklin, PA. I am in my hotel room awaiting the second leg of the Triple Crown tomorrow morning, so shooting the IBO tournament. So while I'm here with nothing to do in my hotel room, I thought I would walk through a basic to intermediate level wood arrow straightening technique. So there definitely are some more advanced ways to get a little more out of your arrows, but I want to cover the stuff that will get you 80% of the way there. And honestly, it's probably all you'll ever need, right? I tend to get into the details of certain things, but for most people, even if you are a high-level competition shooter, what I'm about to show, this very basic straightening technique, is all you will ever need to learn how to straighten wood arrows, okay? So first, let's talk about the equipment that you need. You need an ace roller or something very similar. I have seen guys go to the hardware store and buy pulleys with similar round wheels to this one, and quite frankly, that will work. I don't have a problem with that, as long as the curvature here is similar and it doesn't put any marks on your arrow. I think you can use pretty much anything that has one of those curved wheels on it, but I do recommend just go ahead and spend the coin. It isn't too expensive for this ace roller, and it'll last you a lifetime. The other thing is an arrow spinner, and a lot of you have probably seen these before, but I believe this one's made by Pine Ridge. There's a couple other companies making them. They're pretty inexpensive. You can buy them on Amazon or some of the trad websites. But the deal on this thing is that it's going to come with two brackets, one for either side. And if you notice, I only have one installed. That's the real secret to this whole thing. If you just install only one of the legs, then it doesn't get twisted and contorted, and it actually works better as an arrow straightener if you only install one leg. Plus, this piece here in the middle where it connects tends to break, so especially if you travel a lot like I do. So just putting in one, and you got a backup if you need it, right? That's a good idea. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit. So for those of you that are going to try to build your own arrows, I want to back up for a second, because there is a component of this that matters for arrow straightening. When you put your tip on, now see me, I'm using top hats. So top hats don't go on like a normal wood arrow tip. The tip of the arrow is not tapered. It's just flush, right? And then the tip, the actual point, screws on to the arrow, onto a flush end. Now, most wood arrows, you have to use a taper tool to taper the end of the arrow, and then you glue the point on. For those of you that are doing that, which I assume is a majority of you, the thing, how that correlates to arrow straightening, is that you need to straighten your arrow after you've created the taper, but before you glue your point on. Because even if you think you're gluing your point on, you're probably gluing the point on a little bit crooked. And if you do it the other way, if you straighten the arrow first, then glue the point on, you'll be able to determine if you glued it on straight. Otherwise, if you glue it on crooked and you don't know it, you think you got it straight, and then you start running it on the arrow spinner and the tip is wobbling, and you think, oh, I got a crooked arrow. No, you got a crooked tip. So it takes a really good trained eye to see the difference. So that's why I suggest straightening with your tip. And if you have arrows that you've already glued up, and just, hopefully use hot melt or something, you could just heat them up and pull the tips off and straighten them first and then glue the tips back on. I know that sounds like a lot of work, but welcome to wood arrows. It's a lot of work. So anyway, that's a little tip. So let's assume that we either have our tip off, or we're using top hats, or we have straightened this arrow before and we know that the tip is on straight and we're ready to start straightening, okay? So same thing goes for the knock. The better job you can do of gluing your knock on, the better off you're going to be, because you're going to be looking at these ends to detect wobble, right? So I will set my arrow typically what I call about like a third of the arrow here and 2/3 of the arrow sticking out the back. That's where I start as far as my positioning on the roller, right? And then I spin it, and I always work my way from the back end forward, meaning the straightness back here is far more important next to the knock than the straightness at the tip, and that's basic geometry. So if you take an angle, you know, if the angle gets bigger the further it travels, right? The distance of the third axis. So it's far more important if your arrow was crooked here, you got all this distance to travel with a crooked arrow, versus if your arrow starts being crooked here, well, it's not that big a deal, right? So anyway, we focus on this, the back half of the arrow. We try to get that good and straight. So we're going to move this forward and backward, and we're going to spin it. And really the area that my eye is concentrating on mostly is right in this general area here. And I'm looking, so I try to actually, these are good tables for this. You see how these tables have lines? I try to get my eye lined up with a line, and I start to spin the arrow, and I look to see if, you know, I look to see if it raises up or down, right, and in accordance to the line on the table. So, and that tells me where my high spot or my low spot is. Now, some of you are going to put your arrow on here and start to spin it, and it's going to flop like a fish, and it's going to be very obvious that it's bowed. And then that's real simple to get started with. But these ones that have been straightened before and are really good quality wood, like this True Shaft Sitka spruce, you know, when my arrow is quote unquote crooked, I have to kind of get here and, you know, really pay attention to see anything at all, right? So this arrow is really straight. That's another thing. You got to know when to quit with wood. Like if it's as straight as this, so let's have a look here. You can see if it's as straight as this, we do nothing. We just go shoot, right? We're good to go. We can't see any major wobbles. We're good to go. And now, let's say you do need to straighten your arrow, okay? So you've determined, you've moved it back and forth. You've found, you know, you got some wobble on the end here, but you've moved it forward and back and found the center of the wobble to be right in this area. So now, you know, so it's, let's say it's bowed like this, right? So now what some people do is they lay their arrow flat on the table and they start to compress it with the roller like this. And yes, that will straighten it, but you're also doing some things to the arrow you don't want to do. You're compressing the arrow on one side, so you're making one side of the arrow weaker because you're compressing the wood, and so therefore the spine, you're also changing the spine, not just the straightness. So if you only want to change, and I'm not going to get into the spine portion because for the advanced portion of arrow straightening, there is a way to optimize the spine across your shafts so that they all shoot similarly. However, to do that, you truly need a digital arrow analyzer. And I want to show that in a different video because it's an advanced technique, an advanced process. But basically, what you need to know for straightening purposes is never roll your arrow with it flat on a table, even if you don't have fletchings and, you know, it's totally flat, or like this. Don't ever roll your arrow flat on a table. So let's say you want to roll this section right here. Raise your arrow up and roll it in the air. Now, I would do that, but I'm trying to hold this camera with one hand, but you kind of get the point, right? You're going to, you know, if I wanted to do this end, I would raise it up. Well, let's say I want to focus on just this area right here. You know, I could go to the edge of this table, and I could hold it here, and I could roll the in-between portion in the air, and then, you know, I would only be affecting this portion of the shaft if I had a really bad, tough area that I wanted to really focus on and maybe just bend to just this part. But generally speaking, you can grab a big section and just gently roll across it, and you know, then you will have a pretty straight arrow, right? So that's what I suggest everybody try first. So anyway, that's it. That is pretty much everything you need to get an arrow this straight. The only thing, if I haven't said it yet, is you need to start with high quality wood. So the absolute best wood stock on the market today, in my personal opinion, is True Shaft Archery. They are doing better sorts, better tolerances, better tightness, you know, than anybody out there. And I am not sponsored necessarily by them. I do buy their product. I do use their product. I make my own arrows from their wood stock, and I just haven't tried anything better. Some companies have good quality wood, but it comes pretty crooked. It also comes pretty wet. So you straighten them, and then you have to straighten again. Earlier, well, actually late last year, I did about 3 dozen arrows, and it took me about 15 minutes to straighten 3 dozen arrows, True Shaft Sitka spruce. So I'm a firm believer that this is some of the best wood on the market right now. And another tip of mine, whether you get good dry wood or wet wood, you don't really know, right? Unless you've got a, moisture density tester. I certainly don't own one of those. I like to buy, once you really get into wood arrows, I like to buy everything a year in advance. So, and just let it sit in a place in my house. My basement actually has a dehumidifier, so it's one of the driest places in my house. So let them sit in the cool, dry basement, very low humidity, and they sit there for an entire year. And then when I straighten them, that's about it. I mean, minor re-straightening due to, having to pull arrows out of tough targets, or, maybe your buddy pulls it and bends it a little or whatever. But that's about the extent of the straightening that I have to do. I do check my arrows before major tournaments like I'm doing tonight, but generally speaking, these arrows, they stay straight if they're good and dry when you make them up. So, yeah, go get you some good high-quality wood, and you're going to have a good time. And I can tell you guys, with this simple technique, these things will shoot just about as good as anything on the market. So out of a longbow anyway. So yeah, that's it. I can't really think of anything else. That's about all the tips for straightening wood. The only other thing I could tell you is practice. Practice makes perfect. Your eye will get better at seeing where on the shaft it's crooked, right? And like I said, focus on getting this part straight and go forward from there and get the whole shaft good and straight. Take your time, go slow. These rollers, you can tend to skip off the arrow as you're rolling, and you'll leave a mark or a gash in your arrow. So you want to be real careful. Just take your time. Just go slow. Another thing, that I've had guys ask is, how much pressure do I apply? Well, that's a feel thing, okay? You got to get used to, I know that it just seems like, in my experience, cedar, you got to press on it a little harder. The Sitka tends to take a straightening. It's a little softer. So you got to get familiar with your set of wood arrows. Like, some of them are, if they were totally made up and sealed crooked and they were real wet wood, I mean, they're just a bugger to get straight. Like, you really got to, work on them. But, a good quality arrow that wants to be straight anyway, just a real light, gentle pass. And hey, if you go too light, what's the worst that can happen? It's still crooked, okay? But if you go on it too hard, you make it crooked the other direction. I mean, then you're just chasing your tail around. So, start off gentle and get it back on the spinner and check it out. And if that ain't doing nothing for it, then, hit it a little harder on round 2. But you'll get the feel for that over time if you just keep practicing, all right? So, yeah, you guys put some questions down in the comments and let me know if I missed anything. I'm just trying to go through the basics here, and I don't really know what everybody knows or doesn't know. So if you have any questions, let me know, and we'll get them answered. Thanks.